Good. All right. Good evening, everyone. We'll call this council meeting October 22nd. Happy birthday, I believe, to my son, and I think Jim. Is it not your birthday today? Jim, I might be wrong, but it's not on.
There he is. There. He's smiling. He's he's muted.
You're talking to me?
He's we respect and recognize the First Nations within the unceded lands the village of Kaslo is situated, including the Tanaha, the Snipes, and the Silks people, and the Indigenous and Métis residents of our community. There is one late addition that corporate office has presented, and that is for membership on the accessibility committee. So can we add that as a late item? Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Leafwood. Any discussion? All those in favor? The agenda is adopted as amended to include that item. And then the minutes of the October 8th meeting, if there are no errors or omissions to point out. We're moving or
moving for discussion or second for discussion. Through the chair, just the only thing I noticed was in the minutes, there's an area that says raised from in camera, and we did have an in camera session and we did raise an item, and the item was
just wait until Claire, don't say what it is in case it didn't get raised for a purpose. You don't want to state something that maybe is incorrect.
You'll see it if you look at the in-camera minutes.
I'm doing it, and I'm not hearing anything.
Prior meeting that you can
It's already been and done. It's not important.
There is nothing that's showing on the October 8th in-camera agenda that was to be raised.
Might be there was. Can I whisper it to the field?
Do we have a? No big deal. This agenda for this meeting was produced before the strategic session. So there's nothing to do with the strategic. No, but with the last meeting, yeah, it should be on the current thing that 7 minutes to look at that now. I don't have a record of the resolution for that. I can check when the notice was given.
Okay, it's not. Okay.
It's
There was something on the minutes from the September 10th meeting.
No, it was, so it was discussed, so it was just the scheduling of the in-camera session for strategic planning. And so notice was given, but we didn't have a resolution from council to establish that. That was just done presumably at the call of the chair for a special meeting. And so the notice was given on October 9th. So public notice was given, it was posted on the website, it was posted on the bulletin board. So we
Okay,
need to be our notice requirements for it.
but it was just not,
It
it wasn't about the resolution of council. Okay.
Yeah.
But it also wasn't a secret, because we talked
No,
about it.
no,
openly.
and it's already been and done, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just was under the impression that if you raise something to open, I would see it on the minutes. The next.
If a resolution was made to raise to open, it would appear, but if it happened at the call of the chair after a meeting, then it wouldn't, because it didn't happen within the confines of a meeting
Okay,
for it to be raised.
okay, anyway, it's
Yeah.
not an important.
All right. So then adoption of the minutes as presented has been moved and seconded by Councillor Bird and Councillor Leafwood. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Bless you. So we have one delegation this evening from Aaron Lawrence, who's our Safe BC coordinator. You can come up to the table now, Aaron.
Thank you. I had a small presentation. I understand you may not be able to see it from my laptop.
I think
However,
maybe
it also helps with my prompting. Yeah,
Was it what was already attached, or is it additional to what you provided to staff?
just a summary with images.
Okay.
It's slightly updated.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was my first season, 2024. It was a bit of a learning curve, and there were some disruptions in the upper management with WildSafe. It's just been an interesting year for us all. However, I feel like we've gotten some pretty good work done, and I'd like to do more in the future. But we'll just go through 2024. So one thing I noticed with the different CO reports that have come through is that the numbers are declining in reportings. So I've added that in my 2025 recommendations that I would like to maybe provide some more information or talks to the general public about the role of conservation officers and about how reporting wildlife can help rather than harm. So that's just a trend I'm noticing and something to keep in mind going forward. So a lot of what I've focused on this year is the information booths. So through providing a space where the public can come, we set out all the pamphlets, we provided information for whatever was coming up. And if nothing came up and they were coming over for general interest, then we would just find something that would catch their general interest, usually through a story they would share, and then provide some information that way. So lots of talks about grizzly bear, black bear, and cougar behavior came up. And then lots of talks around rats as well. Yeah, it's been a popular one this year. So through door-to-door canvassing is probably where I met and engaged with the most amount of people. Some of this was for call-outs for the council, just to address a few basic issues that had come up or been brought to their attention by other members of the public. I had 2 call-outs from the conservation officer who was passing through and noticed some issues. Both were around garbage. And then the other visits were largely for fruit trees, rat sightings, or just general information if they live in a popular bear travel area, such as the river trail or other more forested areas. The rat workshops I've run 2 this year. I feel like I'm getting a better understanding of rats myself. I have quickly had to become an expert. I knew some things, but obviously ratting is very different on an island versus on the mainland. So that's something I do want to focus more on. And then also in the next slide I put up for the moving forward, I would like to provide online workshops for that people can check in or provide recordings to a public space. Just like a summary that people find easy, because I've had the same issue where you want to know something, but there's just too much information out there these days, so to simplify. All right, so other things I've been up to is just running small events. I was not able to engage with the schools this year, but I would like to moving forward. I've gotten in touch with the principal and a couple of teachers, and they seem to be interest there. I would also like to do something with the school holiday program. That would be interesting. But for now, I just did a coloring competition that focused around animal habitats and behaviors. So whatever animal they were interested in, we would have a chat around. Did some hands-on fruit gleaning. I found that was the most effective for the most troublesome trees that got a lot of complaints, was to go in and physically help them box up the fruit, because then you have more of a chance to engage and feel less threatened than knocking on the door. So did that, and then through doing that and through knocking on doors, I was able to connect them to 2 different farmsteads, whatever worked for them if they had too many apples. And then, yeah, the bin tagging I found really interesting. There was a thought that perhaps people were putting their rubbish bins out too early. But through all my driving around in Kaslo on Monday nights, I found that people are actually really good about it. There's only been a few recycle bins out, and then I think 3 rubbish bins total this season. And any bins I tagged, they were never put out again early. So people are quite onto it that way, and I really appreciate that. So in a quick conclusion, what I'd like to do moving forward is just check in on the bin tagging next year, maybe once a month, just break it up a little. The gleaning activities and providing an incentive for people with fruit trees, maybe putting up signs to let other people know their apples are available, because that's been the biggest attraction this year. Junior reindeer programs, we've covered that. The conservation officer covered that. So maybe some kind of incentive around, I know we don't have a bylaw officer, but maybe some kind of talks about responsibility, or at least promoting a sense of wanting to follow through for the public. The wildlife safety and awareness workshops is something I was wanting to do this year and ran out of time. I'll do a cougar awareness workshop as part of the wrap up for the season, and maybe some bear information. I'm talking to the landlord about that one at the moment. So that'll be the big end of season talk. And then bear spray workshops for spring and fall next year. I received my inert cans, so now I am set up to provide the training here in Kaslo. And then the availability for online talks we've also discussed. So yeah, that's me. Is there any questions for WildSafe so far?
Questions? Councillor Leaflet, to the chair. So people are better at not putting their bins out, but what about adequate storage? Like, are they storing them in places where the bears can't get at them?
So far, it seems that way. I can't say for sure. There were some reports of bears breaking into sheds this year. So maybe I'll do some more talks around that. I'm also doing more research around bear-proof bins for the public. There's been some questions around that, but no clear leads on to the best way forward. So that's something I'll continue to look at, but I never saw any bins out. Either like against the property or in the backyards when I was looking at fruit trees. So I think they understand. I think there's enough awareness there.
And at what point do you contact the conservation officer with a bear if it just keeps coming back? Or
so reporting at any time is very helpful. They use the statistics for like many different reasons. It could be funding, it could be education, it could be passageways, or it could just be problem areas. So it just provides them with more information to work with. So they can be called at any time to report a sighting. And then if there are repeat offenders, I will be sent out, or a member of council will be contacted. And that is to provide education, because it's a human conflict at that point. And if the bear becomes habituated and starts interacting in a way that could harm humans or their pets, that's when a conservation officer may come out in person, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will result in the deer being destroyed. It's more, they may come and talk to the person themselves if there's been a change. So they don't enjoy putting down animals, but some people have interesting views around that, but it can be helpful to report at any time.
Right. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Brown?
The chair. We used to have something in Kaslo called the Kaslo Fruit Tree Project, where people who had trees they were unable to harvest, would it be able to be connected with people who did not have trees but wanted to be able to have access to fruit? And they would pick the trees, and 50% would go to the person who owned the tree, and 50% to the person that picked it. Have you looked into anything like that? It could be a lot for one person to go and try to pick all the derelict trees, but I'm not quite sure where that ended, but it might be a fruitful avenue. And have you talked to anyone or heard anything about possibly reviving that to be able to address some of those trees?
Yeah, I really appreciate that thought, and I think it's what Kaslo needs the most. It'll be the most helpful. I ran into issue with resources, human resources. So as you said, it's a lot for one person, and the volunteer group who was going through the food hub is no longer available to do that. And then this year with the fires and lots of big changes for people, it's just been a difficult year for a lot of people, and people just haven't had the time. So that is something that I feel we really need to focus on this year. Even if it is just putting out the little signs for homeowners saying, you know, come pick me, whether it's a group or organized through a different entity such as the food hub again. But I wasn't able to solidify anything this year, and it would be a great thing to follow through with next year.
Any other questions from council? I do have a suggestion regarding that. I wonder if that might be an area where you could engage some of the students at the school. If they have to do community service hours, I believe, it's been a long time since I've had a child in school, that might be an avenue, because some of that could happen at a time when it's required, because I really hate to see you have to use your time that could be used on education of the broader public picking fruit. It's necessary, but maybe for people who physically can't do it on their own, that some just, you know, can't afford to get rid of their trees. And they also don't have the time to manage them. But I did go to both of your presentations, as you know, and I went a lot, and I thought that was really good information, and I think it was very appreciated by those who were there, because it has been a growing problem over the last few years. So totally appreciate that you were willing to do that and put on those presentations. So look forward to seeing that.
Yeah, and that's a lovely suggestion. If I'm in schools next year as well, I think that might make the connections a bit easier. And I did see they were doing their apple pie bake for Thanksgiving, so I'm sure there are some relevant reasons as well. Yeah, that's wonderful.
One last question. I see that the regional district is still a sponsor. Did you get out into some of the properties in the rural areas surrounding Kaslo, or was it primarily focused in the village of Kaslo?
So all of my work has been in the heart of Kaslo, for a few outlying situations. I went to talk to a few people in Mirror Lake on request, and then a few people out towards Shutty Bench, but not Shutty Bench itself, although some people from Shutty Bench came to the rat workshops.
Okay, yeah. So you might want to talk to Director Watson and see if there's anything as one of the sponsors that she might want to have some involvement. You have some involvement with some of her areas. You know, it sounds like you touched on a few of them, but yeah, that might be a good idea to have some conversation with her next year.
Yeah, I did get a request for a bear spray workshop in Argenta, so
Perfect.
yeah, no, it's definitely something I can add into my next year's list of focusing on.
Yeah, well, Thank you very much, Erin.
Lovely. Thank you for having me.
And it was nice to have you be part of the Kaslo team this year.
Lovely. Yeah, well, it's been a delight and an honor. Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You can stay or you can leave, whichever your choice.
I'm just gonna wander off.
All right.
See you all.
Yep.
Yeah, have a good night.
Good
Very
night.
nice.
All right, so now we'll move into our information items. So I submitted my mayor's report, which was quite brief this time. But were there any questions on that? Councillor Bird?
Yeah, through the chair, I'm not sure from your notes if you were actually in attendance at the rural affairs. You say that municipalities were invited
Yes,
to that rural affairs one, and were you able to attend?
I was, yes.
That seemed like there was a delegation from, and in our notes, it's called the CBT.
No, there was a bit of a
Growth
change.
strategy.
There was a bit of a mix-up between the items that were, it was the CBT highlights, the travel highlights that was supposed to be part of that. That was internal for staff.
Okay,
Just
so
people-
it's definitely an RDCK project, which is what the
Yes.
regional growth strategy.
Yes,
And so they outline sort of phases of it. And one thing I noticed in the first phase, because we saw that, a very brief synopsis of plan, right? That there was community engagement would start in September, October, and I'm just wondering, have they reached out for engagement, or was that it?
no, that was just an introduction, of the consultants that were engaged to do the process. And, there was further discussion, so it's a work in progress, and those were some of the questions that we had asked, and so there'll be more forthcoming.
Okay,
And that, like I said, there was a bit of a mix up. I sent that to staff. And, for their information, and, so I caught it
okay.
when it was uploaded that it was to be internal, because I was asking questions of staff, and then, yeah. So it was supposed to be it is the CBT report that was there. But yes, I did attend.
Okay.
And asked some of those very questions, so,
And we'll wait and see, I suppose.
yes.
Yeah.
All right, Councillor Brown.
From the chair, I just note that I'm excited to see that at the CBT meeting, there was talk of a draft housing development plan for assisting with affordable housing in smaller rural communities. Seemed of interest. It seems like we're kind of at the beginning of that road, but I'm excited to see what that may turn into.
Yeah, and that's all you can get until it's
Yeah.
released officially, but, yeah, that's all I'm allowed to share.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be sure.
Yeah. All right, and then I understand that, Councillor Lang, you have a verbal report to give.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick comments about the UBCM convention, and I think Councillor Brown made reference to this in his report, and that was I spent a good deal of time in the resolutions sessions, and it's just, I mean, maybe I've been going to these conventions for too long, but it just seems like it's just a constant request for money, funding for everybody's pet projects, and it's just I have to sit there and think, where is this money supposed to be coming from? I think at some point, if you've got a project that you think is important to your community, you better look at other ways of financing it other than asking for a handout. So that's just one comment. On a lighter note, I was pleased to see that several of the sessions that I attended at workshops had an environmental bent to them, where they were discussing remediation work and different opportunities for dealing with environmental issues. So that wasn't always the case. When back in the early, when I started going, a lot of sessions were on resource extraction. And now they're talking more about repairing the earth rather than causing, problems. So anyway, that sums it up. I thought it was a good convention and look forward to next year when it's going to be in Victoria, which it hasn't been there for a while, and it's always a pleasure going to Victoria. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. So we'll go around to take, well, I'll just ask if any other members of council have a report. Councillor Brown.
Through the chair, thank you. The Kaslo District Community Forest Society met on October 17th. A few items to highlight. A new bridge was completed across Lost Sledge Creek, which will enable access in coming years to some areas that we've been trying to be able to get to. We spoke quite a bit about the best way for the community forest to assist in wildfire preparedness and response. We were fortunate to be educated. Jesse Lay was there and talked quite a bit about some funding challenges and opportunities that exist. And we agreed, we moved and passed a resolution that the community forest will be investing in additional pumps for fighting wildfire, and a few other items that are needed to replace some things that were stolen. And that the continuation of that conversation will happen at the November meeting to see how best the community forest could help to prepare and respond to possible wildfires in our area. And so that was really the meat of the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Anyone else? And there were no committee meeting minutes. All the committee meetings happened yesterday, so staff hasn't had a chance to put the minutes together. They'll be on the next agenda. And then we'll move into staff reports. And we've got the third quarter municipal progress report. Do that, CEO Baker, or just answer questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Hewitt. Since we don't have printed copies available, if there are any questions, please feel free to ask about the third quarter review. What it provides you with is an update on the number and types of permits that have been issued. Variance permits, development permits, temporary use permits. Also provides you with an update on where we're at with various capital projects, including how much money's been spent. There is a review of our annual goals and objectives, which we are in the midst of, refining for 2025. And there's also a financial report letting you know where we're at now in our budget, where we expect to be by year end. And ultimately, after January, you'll receive a final year-end report, letting you know where everything landed with our finances.
Any questions that council has at this point? Councillor Bird.
Through the chair, I was looking for, I know one of the requirements that, that we need to fulfill is that we do a watershed assessment of our watershed. And I didn't see that on the report. I'm just wondering where that is at.
We put an RFP out to for a consultant to perform source water protection plans for us, and we received no responses. So we now have an opportunity to go directly to a consultant and ask for a quote because our public process didn't quite work out the way we wanted. So we're in transition between our manager of strategic initiatives, who's outgoing, and our incoming, and that's been passed to them to go find a contractor consultant to perform the source water protection plans. I suspect it's going to be well over budget, and so it'll be a consideration for our budget deliberations.
Supplemental.
No, I don't expect you to answer this or know this, but will it be like an on the ground kind of backed up by GIS, or will it be a paper exercise? Do you have any idea what is expected for the source water investigation?
Given the cost estimate we received in the neighborhood of $50,000, we better see some boots on the ground.
Okay.
Councilor Brown.
Through the chair, for the proposed RV park under land administration. It says the OCP was public process that sought input for land use designation, and then further later it says council should be aware that a public process has already occurred regarding land use and it was adopted through a bylaw. Any change to the OCP would require public input. And then on a later point, it states that staff would suggest that after the draft agreement's been reviewed by council and a draft zoning bylaw has been endorsed by both parties, that the developer would be asked to conduct another public information session to communicate the proposal to the public. So I'm wondering if these are in place of the proposed open house, or if this is an addition to what was requested.
The chair, I think maybe the best way to answer those questions are to let me give the CAO report, you know, in its entirety. And then maybe when we get to that topic of the RV park, pause and let council ask the questions. And then I can finish the CAO report if that's agreeable.
Absolutely.
One that's a math question. Under land administration zoning legislation, it's got the budget at 156,400 and 5,800 is the actual in the year end. Is it $156,000 project?
Did I spy on here?
Yeah. I wonder if that's supposed to be, there's one too many zeros on that, or have we got another 150,000 we're spending on that project?
I do not want to misspeak, and so I will have to get back to you.
Yeah, we would have a contract, I'm sure. So that just jumped out at me, but it was especially if it's 50% complete. So that, to me, with it being 50% complete, it's just got one too many zeros on there. So just wanted to make sure. All right, any other questions before we move on to the next agenda item?
But
Oh, no, that was just, oh, okay, that's part of that. That was just the financial report. That we would,
Oh, okay, sorry. I didn't understand that.
yeah, because there's, I think the report comes up later, doesn't it? That's my thing.
I think it was right before, but.
Oh, it was before.
In the same section.
Okay. I'm sorry. Oh, that's, you know, baby. All right. Well, that would have answered a question that before it was asked.
apologize, all good. So, as you know, you've been given a third quarter report. And with respect to, finance, we had a 2020 UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund that provided us with funding for structural flood mitigation. That was performed. We received our final payment of $72,000, so that completes our 2020 project. Legal matters, boat clubs. We went back, you might recall that we chatted with a lawyer about the term of our agreements with the boat clubs. And we were keen to have our agreements with the boat clubs align with our agreement with the province for the mortgage lease, which extends to 2036. So we were given legal advice that certainly we can match that term. So those agreements have now gone back to the boat clubs, and we're hoping to finalize them quickly. And then as part of the legislative requirement, we need to give the public notice that we're disposing of this mortgage lease to the boat club. So that'll be taking place hopefully within the next month, and then that's put to bed. Manage strategic initiatives. We have um, a new manager that started work yesterday, and our outgoing manager's last day will be this Friday. So they have a week of overlap and have been chatting to make sure there's a smooth transition and we don't drop the ball on any of our projects. And so far it's been going extremely smooth. So I have high hopes that we'll move forward across the finish line. With respect to land administration, specific to the RV park, there's a few items here that I wanted to highlight for council and make sure they understand at this point. The first was that when the OCP was approved through bylaw in 2022, there was a process in which we asked the public, what do you want to see in the way of our land use designations? And the South Beach area was of particular interest. The decision was made to identify it as a waterfront development area. And further to that, when we have a waterfront development area that's on a floodplain, the acceptable uses were identified as seasonal campgrounds and RV park. Certainly there could be others, but that was the one and only use for a floodplain that was identified at that time. And so the purpose of bringing that up is just to reassure council that somewhere along the line, we did communicate with the public and seek input on what should we do with this land area. And the public was able to give their feedback at that time. And ultimately it was decided waterfront development area. And if it's on a floodplain, campground or RV park. So just one thing to highlight. Another piece of information to make you aware of is that after discussing with the developer, we went back to the appraiser and said, this area of land near the highway, we don't want to, certainly we want to eventually own all of this land here, but we don't want to pay for the road right of way. That needs to be subtracted from whatever agreement we come up with. So they removed the area that equates to the 20-meter road right of way. So the net disposal for the village would be 4.59 acres times the appraisal value of 52,500. And so the exchange would be 240,975 as detailed on the staff report you have. So I believe previously it was around 205 or 210, something like that. So you can see the difference reflected there. The lawyer's been asked to revise a draft purchase and sale agreement to reflect that dollar value. And they were also asked to identify that if the developer chooses to subdivide into bare land strata, where they could sell off these individual RV pads, then the approving officer is within their right to require a 7-meter strip of land along the waterfront to provide the public with access to the water. So it's important that the developer knows up front, if they go bare land strata, the approving officer will very likely require that 7 meters. Up until this point, we had talked about simply an easement. So it might be a 3-meter wide easement with a path along the waterfront. But if it was bare land strata, the village would own 7 meters along the waterfront. And it would be from the natural boundary, the high water line, so to speak, 7 meters from there. 7 meters is just over 20 feet, which would be, think of it, the length of this room, about 20 feet. There would still be the 15-meter waterfront protection area. So there's still not going to be any construction anywhere near that area, but we would own 7 meters. So all of that would go into the draft agreement. And then that agreement would come back to council to consider the terms. So what's not in the terms up until this point is, does council also want to consider parkland or cash in lieu? You could consider those kinds of things as part of the agreement. We haven't got to that point yet. Just want to let you know, once you see that agreement, staff will provide you with other options that you might want to consider before finalizing it. As a condition of the agreement, we need a zoning bylaw for the RV park. And so what makes good sense is that the developer be responsible for developing that zoning bylaw so that they're responsible for the cost directly. We don't need to then invoice them and try to recover the expense. They use a professional planner to develop the zoning bylaw. And then that zoning bylaw is taken by the village to our lawyer who's acting on our behalf. And we talk to them about, the sprinkler restrictions, that we only want it to be seasonal use, that we don't want RV park storage. We give them all of the conditions that we want, and the lawyer makes sure that the village is protected. And that's a standard practice or process. So I know it might sound odd to have the developer write the zoning bylaw, but it's simpler and easier to do it that way, as long as we have a lawyer that's overseeing the zoning bylaw. And staff would also suggest that once we have this zoning bylaw, it makes sense to the village, and we have the terms of the agreement, kind of the money and how much land we would be transferring. Once we have those details figured out, then we pause. And we have another public information session where all of the information, the whole picture, gets provided to the public by the developer. Just like we did in November 2023. And not that when it occurred in 2023, it was premature, but certainly things have changed or evolved in the last year. And so from staff's perspective, it makes good sense to go back to the public and let them know exactly what's going on. And just as was done in 2023, a report and summary of all of the public's comments and feedback is then provided by the developer to the village so that council can weigh those comments before deciding whether to proceed with signing that purchase and sale agreement. In the meantime, we certainly want the public to know what's going on. And based on previous meetings, you get the sense that they haven't quite grasped all the information yet that council's had the luxury of following along with over the last 12 months. So when our staff who are sick right now this week, once they're back to work, the plan is for them to create a page on our website where the public can click on it and find all of the details of this RV park proposal, to include all of the staff reports and all those attachments, the appraisal and any planning reports that were attached to them, so that the public can more easily find all the information rather than sifting through our meeting minutes and that. So maybe what I could do is pause and see if there's any questions at this point.
And recognizing that we're not taking any action out of this, we're just for information. And if you want to, there's no discussion about dollar values that are in here because that is in camera. So it doesn't affect our negotiating position if it comes to that. So Councillor Lee.
So in like your first paragraph, you said that when the OCP was the public process for the OCP, it was identified that a possible use for that area would be campground RV park, but there was no recommendation to change the zoning at that time.
Correct.
So then it says that then if there is going to be changes to the OCP, then there needs to be a public consultation process. So if we are going to be changing the zoning, isn't it up to council to provide that consultation process?
Through the chair, so the OCP wouldn't need to change. The OCP has provided the land use designation of waterfront development area. So the OCP is complete in that regard. Outside of that, we have a zoning bylaw. And so if we wanted to create this RV park zoning bylaw, for lack of a better word, then absolutely there's a public process as part of it.
We just supplement that. I'll be questions. Okay, I'll think about it.
And.
Oh,
Sorry.
oh, thanks. Sorry, I remember. So if, if the developer does have a public meeting where, he, presents the proposal to the public, would there be a staff member present to, because I think part of the confusion is council process. So there would be a staff member there that could talk more about the process that council has to follow rather than the actual development.
Through the chair, I believe it would be in our best interest for staff to be there. What staff I think should try to avoid is the public having the perception that staff or the village or council are defending their proposal in some way or justifying it or advocating for it. We need to make sure it's clear that they've come to the village with a proposal and staff can provide commentary on the process, but we just need to make sure there's a line between what staff's role is in this public information session versus the developer.
Right. That's where I think there is some confusion. Right. Thank you.
To the chair. So I suppose I would then restate my question from earlier, which would be, would this public session that would be at the proponent that would do a public information session, is the suggestion that that be in place of a open house or a public forum through council? And were it to be, then I would ask, why would we want the developer to tell us what the public wants instead of us going to the public to find out what they want?
To the chair. It seems to be a best practice to put the onus of a public information session on the developer rather than the village coordinating it, which then could lead to confusion about the role and the stance of the village on it, where the village then could be seen as advocating or defending this proposal. So I think the reason why it's typically the developer doing the public information session is to separate the village from the proposal. Could the village also seek public input outside of that? 100% yes. So if council felt like they didn't receive the information or the input that they needed from the public to feel satisfied, then absolutely the village could decide to go and have another public engagement in whatever way, online, in person, letters delivered, whatever makes good sense to council. So you can do both if you feel like the public information session wasn't sufficient.
So then am I to understand then that the suggestion is indeed that this public session would be the next opportunity and step for the public to be able to interact with this would then be with the developer, not with council. And that were that to be found insufficient, deemed by council, at that point, then we would then go to a public session that was not run by the developer. Like my mindset being that listening to the public about this and having a public information session doesn't make the assumption that we are for or against it. It merely provides them an opportunity to be able to discuss outside of just sending letters, which we have gotten many of on both sides. But it provides them something which the public has clearly asked for, which is to talk to us as a council and not to this, to the proponent. When we've had an opportunity to talk to the proponent, I think the public would welcome another opportunity, but I think that that is maybe missing the point of asking to speak with us as council, as the decision makers who are being presented with this. So I would suggest that we not consider this as something that would happen after another session, or that us doing this would mean that we're have an agenda in it for or against, but rather that we are responding to the requests of the community to be able to have further public sessions around this with council and not merely with the proponent.
Through the chair. I hear you. And if council could give me time to think about the best way to proceed and maybe get some guidance and then report back at the next council meeting to make sure that, yeah, that's agreeable.
Absolutely. That'd be good.
I just have a question. So, regarding zoning, and it flows out of the OCP, and we've just, what ended up happening was that we didn't have enough time to redo the zoning bylaws to get them consistent with the new OCP, correct? That's why we're going through this process, is because it's now not in alignment with the change, the amended OCP.
So
Several areas.
that's correct. The zoning bylaw needs to be amended to align better with the OCP that changes.
Yeah.
That said, the reason, even if we, at any point in the last 2 years, the village could have updated its zoning bylaw to align with the OCP. And it still wouldn't have touched on the specific zoning for this waterfront development area. We reserved any decision on zoning for that area until we receive a proposal so that we can decide what kind of zoning makes good sense based on that proposal. I'll explain that okay?
Yes, thank you. All right,
Shall I proceed?
yes, please.
Liquid Waste Monitoring Committee had a meeting on October 21st, and we talked about the status of recommendations that they had originally made in 2023. So in your CAO report here, you're provided with a quick update that works in progress to gather data on septic systems in Lower Kaslo. So some of that information is going to come from Interior Health. They have records about when they were installed and any improvements that have happened. And the intention is to better understand what the condition is of the septic systems that might influence our decision for connecting them to our sewage treatment plant. So it's simply information gathering. Similar would be lake water testing to see if there's any indication that septic systems are failing and ultimately ending up in the lake, and how that might influence a decision regarding the sewer plant. And then finally, a source control bylaw, which would control who, how, when effluent is discharged into our system by businesses and homes, give us better control. And that needs to be considered alongside council's other strategic priorities for 2025. How important is this bylaw relative to all the others that need to be reviewed or developed? So more to come on that one. With respect to parks, Kaslo Family Mountain Bike Park, there's maintenance work that's planned for tomorrow by Courts and the grade 8 outdoor education class. The Baseball Softball Association, we have improvements that are underway at the ballpark. The vast majority of the work that the village is responsible for has been completed, scoreboard and fencing, electrical, and the dugouts are going to start at any time that work's performed by the association, and it's outside the scope of the village. So the work will start for the dugouts this year and then be concluded in the springtime, from what I understand. Regional Growth Management Plan, just to echo what's already been talked about, an engagement plan has been developed, and there is currently a draft online survey. There was lots of feedback that the regional district received from other members about council involvement. And from what I understand, they're considering what to do in order to allow councils to feel like they're being engaged as part of this process. So more to come. Strategic planning, we had our meeting on October 20th. With any luck, there'll be another meeting next week where we can finalize the priorities and then take those to influence our 2025 draft budget and staff work plans. Capital projects, pleased to advise that we've received up to $10,000 in a infrastructure planning grant that'll help us gather additional data specifically for water treatment plant, sewage treatment plant, in order to put into our asset management plan and help us prepare for our future investments. Looks like the end of my CIO report. Thank you, Mary Hewitt.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on the last few items? Councillor Baker.
To the chair, just about personnel, are we getting any closer to an admin system?
No. Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for asking. Apologies for not touching on that. We have 2 interviews scheduled this week for administrative positions. And we are in the midst of negotiating a contract with someone who can provide additional support to our corporate officer outside of the front desk duties, someone that can help develop these policies and bylaws that are of interest to council, as well as agendas and meeting minutes, these kind of things. So
Great.
At our next council meeting, I should have good news.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, CEO Baker. Okay, so that brings us to correspondence. We've got several letters and that they're received for information. Okay. I was actually informed that I have been doing it incorrectly, and I forgot already as soon as you told me. I was supposed to ask at the beginning of the meeting if the member of council wanted to pull an item of correspondence for action or further discussion. That was to happen at the beginning of the meeting during agenda adoption. If you know that you want to, then that's why they're just deemed to be correspondence. So I've been doing it incorrectly, and whether is that a new development in the corporate officer world after your training and
It can always, that's the standard process, but it can always be overridden by a vote of council, right? So if council as a whole votes at any point in the meeting to add something new or do something that's not at the agenda, you just require a vote of council in order to do that. Right. I guess the distinction is that once the agenda has been adopted, it's not up to any individual member of council doesn't have the power to turn an information item into a business item. It requires consent.
to make note to self for future meetings, and then council members will have to actually make a note to self as well. If you do know that you want to raise an item and make it become a business item, bring that up at the beginning of the meeting. So then that would bring us to question period. Because we still have quite a bit of business left to go through, I will limit it to questions only, no statements, and limit it also, please, to questions for new information, not things that have already been asked and answered. So if there are any questions, I'm just going to expand my screen online as well. So I can monitor that. So you're online and in person, I see.
Oh, that's Laura and Kathy.
Oh, no, that's my sister. We get confused for each other.
Oh, okay.
Even
Sorry.
one person.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, so we'll go to the room first this time.
I guess my question is, I'm trying to word it like a question. So my understanding is that the developer will do the zoning, like reword the zoning, and then it will come to council and you get a lawyer and then make sure that whatever works for Kaslo is also in there. And then when you have a second reading, and then that will be, yeah, we adopt this, and then the developer will have a public meeting. Is that the order of things?
Thank you, Mayor Hewitt. So if the developer and the village can agree on a draft zoning bylaw, then the land transaction is enabled. It can actually occur. The process then for the zoning, council would have first reading, second reading, third reading. It would then be referred to the Ministry of Transportation to review and make sure that they don't have any concerns with the zoning. And then it would come back to council for final approval of the zoning bylaw.
And then the developer would have a public meeting about what he wants to do.
Through the chair, what staff are proposing is that once the developer and the village have come to an agreement on the zoning bylaw, we both feel good about it, and council is satisfied with the terms of the agreement, then at that point, before we go to first, second, third reading, we have a public information session.
Okay, so I thought there was a first reading of something that's already in process. That's different than what we're talking about right now?
That's right. We
That's
have
the zoning.
yes, they have a zoning bylaw. They have a zoning application that's in. And so I cannot answer your question, but I'll defer to the person with their hand up.
I also want to know this stuff.
Yeah.
So I think, and this is off the top of my head, so forgive me if I get partway through and correct myself. But we have a zoning bylaw that's received first reading. I think that what we're contemplating at this point is that there are likely going to be some changes to that zoning bylaw before it hits second reading. And the public information session would occur likely before the new zoning bylaw has received second reading. It's gonna have the same number, it's still a rezoning bylaw, it's still dealing with the same piece of land, just some of the content may.
So I think,
different.
Laura, we'll move on to someone else, because you've had several questions. So
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
you're welcome.
And it's hard to, it's confusing to navigate this.
Well, and obviously it's a new process for us as well. So that's why it's taking so long, right? Because it's quite complex. It's not something that we deal with every day.
Okay.
So it does seem like it's taking a long time, which it has to, because we want to make sure that we're going through all the steps correctly and doing the best that we can for the village within the rules that we've got in place. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, go ahead, Linda. And, new questions, if
New questions. Yes, first, when you say public information meeting, that's referring to the developer's public information meeting or a possible open house from council?
Through the chair, the public information sessions are coordinated by the developer. And so one of the questions that council has raised at this meeting is where is an opportunity for council to interact directly with the public on questions? And so that's where staff are going to go back and seek guidance and come back to the next council meeting with options for council to consider for how it can engage directly with the public in an open setting outside of a public information session.
Okay, thank you. And if that were to happen, I mean, after you chat about it and at the next meeting, I guess you have no idea when that might happen. No, okay. And then when it was mentioned about the website page, like, will all of the letters that have been received, will they be on that website page as well, open for the public to read, and the correspondence regarding this issue.
I think that would be time dependent because they all have to be suitably redacted. So there's not private information that should not be
Right.
posted publicly.
Right.
And that will depend on staff resources.
Oh,
If that is going to be part of it, that would have to happen first. So because of the volume of correspondence, it could take quite a while. Is that accurate?
I think it's just, staff have chatted internally about what information should be on the website. A final decision hasn't been made, but we're in the process of, notwithstanding the time it takes to redact the letters, we also need to consider what value is it providing, having, the information that staff believe is important to the public is the information that's been presented to council within staff reports and various planning reports. At this point, that seems to be the critical information. And what all of the commentary and letters received from the public, I think more time needs to be spent by staff figuring out, is it the value and how much time it takes needs to be thought about.
excuse me.
So
I
I
guess
would like that to be your last question. I'm giving a lot of leeway, but there might be
Yeah.
other people who have questions, so I'd like to allow time.
But we should be able to know like how many are for and against. Like, there should be some way to become aware of the response when people write to council.
Through the chair, the information that was received from the public in the way of letters has been summarized and provided to council in staff reports. And so the information will, that kind of information is available to the public.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there any, if you are online and you want to ask a question, you can use the raise hand function. All right. I don't see anyone raising their hand online, and I would take one more question from the public.
Will you be catching the next meeting, is it called the US election?
Will we be?
The council meeting the night of the US election.
So that we will, the US election that should not impact our business.
You're kind of trick it.
All right. Thank you for your questions. All right, so we'll move into business. Our first item is a request for community development funds from the Kaslo Community Services for their holiday hampers. And the recommendation that I will make is that council approves the Kaslo Community Services application for $4,000 in funding from the Community Development Grant Program for holiday hampers. By Councillor Bird and seconded by Councillor Leafwood. Any discussion? I will note that Director Watson did indeed already, we passed it at the board meeting last week, so she's given some similar support. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That motion is carried. And a grant application for the Columbia Basin Trust Small Community Wildfire Readiness Supports.
Jesse is online.
Any questions? So does anyone have questions for Jesse prior to moving the resolution, or are we prepared to move that recommendation?
I'll move it.
Okay, that the village of Kaslo submitted application for funding from the Columbia Basin Trust's Small Community Wildfire Readiness Supports Program for up to $18,300 towards attending the Wildfire Resiliency Summit and gathering detailed information about the availability of water sources. So moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Next item is a request for in-kind assistance from Kaslo Search and Rescue. And the recommendation is that the village provide an operator and equipment as in-kind services to assist Kaslo Search and Rescue with motor vehicle accident training scenarios up to 5 hours annually.
Then we were discussion.
Okay, moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Good. Discussion?
Through the chair. So in the staff report, it says if council would like to continue to support SAR as requested, then they suggested to adopt a policy by resolution with some conditions. Were we to want to choose to support SAR in perpetuity instead of as a one-off, would there be a possibility for us to do that? Would that be at a future meeting? Is that something that we would include now? Did I read that correctly in the staff report?
I think that because this talks about an annual commitment, this would be, if council adopts this resolution, that would get added to the policy manual as a standalone item, and staff would rely on it until such time as council passed a motion to change
Okay,
the arrangements.
So that's then implicit in the motion.
great.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. And 7.4, municipal regional district tax renewal. Recommendation is that the village of Kaslo provide a letter of support to Nelson Kootenai Lake Tourism's collection of the 2% municipal regional district tax for a 5-year term. And I'll give you some, I've got it open here. Because this is shared, I'm just going to give you some information before I read the recommendation. Well, I read the recommendation, but just for information. It is shared between the city of Nelson, the village of Kaslo, and RDCK electoral areas A, D, E, and F. And there was much discussion at the board meeting because there was concern that there wasn't a component that was going towards housing. But we know from the report that was submitted by Peter Moynes at the last meeting that they weren't prepared to do that at that time, and that they were going to remain at the 2% versus 3%. But at the regional district board, the resolution was to just give support for 1 year and engage with them to see and have the regional district staff look into how they might be able to direct some funding to housing and how that would work. Because when we were talking about it during the meeting, it seemed that it wasn't as straightforward as it might seem. So they're going to do some research. So I'll keep you informed, and I don't think it changes, but I thought just for your information. And I don't know whether that really throws that resolution that was passed to make it a single year, throws a monkey wrench into things for them or not. It allows them to proceed for this year. It gives that support. So just for information. I'm going to move our recommendation, okay, and seconded by Councillor Bird.
Sorry, I forget the process for amending. So we have can I speak for discussion? Through the
Yes.
chair?
Yeah.
So we have for a 5-year term.
Yeah.
So am I understanding this right, that the RDCK at their board meeting had a similar resolution, but they just went for a 1-year term?
Yes.
So we could amend. I like what they did. And I would not, my amendment would be to match our resolution to the one that the RDCK did. So that we give the RDCK a chance and the the tourism providers a chance to see how that might work, because at this point there is no regional fund for housing, and this would kickstart, won't be a whole lot of money, but it'll be some, and it'll be the beginning of something that's never happened before, which would be a fund for affordable housing, how that would get distributed and managed and administered is definitely something that is not understood at this point.
I think the other thing to factor in is Nelson is the largest of, they've got the most population out of Kaslo and the rest of the surrounding area, and I don't know what, I didn't, the director for Nelson did not speak up and say whether they were, which way their council had gone, or maybe they hadn't made a resolution yet, so I don't know what Nelson has done, and I really don't know how it affects anything. I don't think anybody knows how it's going to affect Nelson Kootenai Lake tourism if we limit it when they're asked to do 5-year agreements with the province for that funding. I really don't know. And it was like a same thing. It was an at the table thing that there wasn't time for staff to do proper research in advance of the amendment coming forward. So, if you can, there's certainly nothing stopping you from proposing an amendment to the resolution that's been put on the table.
So through the chair, so my suggestion for an amendment would be to substitute the word 5 for 1.
Discussion on the amendment from 5-year term to 1-year term.
I mean, to say that I think that what you are saying, Madam Chair, is that it may not be acceptable to the province to issue an approval for a single year. That may not allow for the continued collection of the MRDT in our area. And that is a piece of information that we haven't had the opportunity to confirm what the impact of that proposed change would be with the deciding body, which is one of the provincial ministries that is the MRDT that many people participate in overseeing that program.
Councillor Brown?
To the chair, I guess my question would be, is this time sensitive in the sense that if we were to defer this to be able to gather that information, would that would get in the way of what they need to do?
Yes, I believe that even waiving our policy of not making the resolution at the same meeting as a delegation, that they were already behind, I think, when the delegation happened.
Sure.
Yeah, I believe that they had submitted all of the renewal documents to the province to proceed with the renewal. And then the province identified some deficiencies with their submission, which was the lack of formal letters of support from the local governments and the participating jurisdictions.
Councillor?
Just a comment, I'm not really impressed by the process between the province and North Kootenai tourism.
Yes.
I don't think, I'm not sure that I want to bend over backwards because they never gave us any time to consider this. That we should just, okay, well, we're in a hurry, so you must do this. I don't appreciate that. So this is the first time we're hearing it. When at the delegation at the last meeting, I really felt like it was such a done deal that and we're such small potatoes that really there's nothing that we can do to affect it. And I've had my own feelings about this 2% tax going to a certain set of people and nobody else for the last 5 years. I didn't like the system when it started. And just because there was no discussion of how the 2% hotel tax would filter down to any kind of other tourist promoters it was just right away, it was this like Crown Corporation kind of deal, not literally. And it was imposed on us. And I feel like we're getting another we're being asked for a decision, but it's not genuine. They're not really asking for our opinion or support. They're basically saying, we need to have it now because we're behind the 8 ball. And we haven't considered for our area any other option than this. So please sign. I don't appreciate that.
Councillor Hooper?
To the chair. Could we amend the amendment to say a 1-year term if acceptable by the province?
So we've got to vote on the amendment on the table first.
Okay.
But what I would offer is, we did ask at the table if, because they could have gone to 3%. And they chose to stay at 2%, and it was indicated that that could change during that 5-year term. So whether we instead do an alternate recommendation that a subsequent one that says, we strongly urge you to look into pursuing a component, at least a component to go to housing, or, you know, and then we can take advantage of the fact that the regional district is looking into it, then our staff doesn't have to, and they'll, you know, and because I'll keep you informed and or staff informed, and then that doesn't, then this can move forward, and but do put forward if we feel strongly about looking into the housing, that just say that we would like strongly encourage them to look into how to deliver on the housing component or something like that. And that doesn't even have to happen at this meeting to wordsmith the resolution, but just maybe as a notice of motion to the next meeting. That's a way to do it. Then it signals that you want one, and then you can work with staff to come up with something suitable rather than trying to draft something now that might not be what you want. Does that make sense?
It's through the chair. It's a good solution because, again, we don't want to be like rushing around on their timetable anyway. And like we could, the actual, the recommendation here is to provide a letter of support. And if we were provide a letter of quasi support, yes, you get the 5 years, but we're not in support of the 2% for the full 5 years. I mean, that would be an awkward letter to write now. And again, I don't want to work on their timetable and rush it. So I could take back my amendment, withdraw my amendment, and in my own mind with the assumption there will be a subsequent motion.
Okay, so let's do, so if the mover and seconder are fine with the withdrawal of the amendment,
So we're back to the main motion.
then back to the main motion. So the mover and seconder are both fine with withdrawing that amendment. So we'll go back to the main motion. Okay, all right. So on the main motion, is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. So then we would like to put forward a notice of motion regarding writing a letter to Nelson Kootenai Lake Tourism regarding adding housing.
Yeah, so to go for the 3%, yeah, that we'd be in support during this 5-year term of investigation into. We'd like to see the 3%.
So maybe just notice of motion that to come forward with that we work on a letter to come forward to the next meeting, or how? We'll defer to you. I'm trying to make it easier on you, but I might be making it more difficult.
Notice of motion to write a letter in support of the idea of a 3%, what do they call it? A 3% tax, hotel tax, with the 1% in addition to the current 2% going toward the housing fund.
So it's 3% max.
I know.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's 2% now.
Oh, okay, raising it.
So
to 3.
we would indicate our support of going to 3%, assuming that that extra 1% would go to a housing fund.
How about for notice of motion, I understand what you're saying, but how about we go with this and vote, to consider changes to the MRDT?
Okay,
And then that can be fleshed out as part of what comes back. But at least we capture the subject matter.
Yeah.
As the notice of motion and the details. I think what we're trying to get away from is doing details on the fly.
yes.
Councillor Lang.
So where do the accommodators fit into all this? Aren't, they're the ones that are collecting the tax, they're the ones that suggested the 2%. Or agreed to the 2%.
Yeah.
Is our role really to be dictating the terms of this agreement? Aren't we just a rubber stamp for what the accommodators want?
Can I provide some input there?
They do, the accommodators are the ones who do collect it, and Nelson Kootenai Lake Tourism can go to non-tourist businesses or non-accommodators and ask them to donate basically to that fund because they're promoting tourism. But they can go to non-accommodators to do that, and, Councillor Bird?
Through the chair, it was my impression at the delegation where that he did, that very point was raised. And it didn't seem to make, he gave me the impression that the accommodators were, yeah, 2% is fine, 3% won't make any difference. That's the impression I got at the delegation last week, which I thought was a little surprising, but 2%, 3% did not seem to be any big hoopla about that.
So we're debating something that we've already passed, so notice of motion does not require a vote, right? Yes, Councillor Bird is putting on a notice of motion for the next one.
Notice of motion that council consider requesting changes to municipal and regional district tax at the 2024-11.
All right, 7.5, RDCA Economic Development Commission appointments. So, and what I am going to suggest is that we move this motion because we haven't done anything formally. So the recommendation is that Rick May and Councillor Rob Lang be appointed as representatives of the Village of Kaslo on the Kaslo and Area D Economic Development Commission for a 2-year term ending December 31st, 2026. Moved by Councillor Leafwood, seconded by Councillor Bird. Discussion. So my discussion is, we almost had an Economic Development Commission meeting yesterday. We had earlier in the day, we had one for the shared services, and Economic Development Commission was an agenda item, but because we thought we had quorum, so a meeting was called for the commission, because we've had abysmal turnout. It's been months since we've had a meeting because commission members, we don't have enough commission members, and the ones that we do have not been in attendance, and for whatever reason. So for yesterday, staff went to all the effort and reached out to, communicated with all of them, and thought we'd achieved quorum. So at the shared services or North Kootenai Lake Services meeting, we deferred discussion because we thought it, in all fairness to the commission, that the discussion regarding the future of that commission should be had at that table. And because we didn't achieve quorum, we could not have that discussion. So its very existence is in question, but because that hasn't formally occurred, that the commission is going to go dormant again, then we would, we'll go ahead as if it's going to continue until such time as the directors choose not to continue. And we've had discussion about how to perhaps continue supporting some of the items that were on the Economic Development Commission budget. So there is more to come, but I still think we should pass this in all fairness, because we haven't made that final determination. We don't want to be caught, inadvertently making it so we don't have enough members on the commission. If these two individuals are not appointed, we do not have a definitely don't have a functional commission.
Mayor, if I can make one request, since Councillor Lang are not sitting he's sitting in a public space rather than a council directed seat, so I would like to remove the word councillor.
Oh,
from the
okay.
resolution with everybody's permission.
I missed that. What am I doing?
No, there's
You're the chair.
It's just the directors.
Oh,
And
just the
then the
directors.
balance of seats are actually for members of the public.
Mm.
So Councillor Lang has been taking off his councillor hat every time he sits as a commissioner. And I just apologize for the error in the proposed resolution, but I think for correctness, we should just refer to Rick May and Rob Lang.
Okay. So the mover and seconder are okay with that? All right, so any further discussion on that? All those in favor? That motion is carried. Next item is Health Advisory Committee appointments. Recommendation is that Jana Guggenheim and Patrick Steiner be appointed to the Health Advisory Committee for a term ending December 31st, 2026. Moved by Councillor Bird, seconded by Councillor Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried, and we thank them for their interest in sitting on the Health Advisory Committee. Next item is disposition of lot 60, 515 6th Street. And I will look to CAO Baker to give us some background on that.
Thank you, Mayor Hewitt. This one's a little odd. You've had a chance to look at the staff report. There's this tiny piece of land, 100 square feet. And it's not, depending on how you look at things, it's not mandatory that the adjacent property owner purchase this land as part of their subdivision application. From an approving officer's perspective, it makes good sense to not subdivide their land unless they purchase lot 60 from a staff non-approving officer's perspective. There's a lot more sympathy for the property owner. And so really what it comes down to is giving this property owner a couple of options. If they want to proceed with subdivision, then require them to purchase this lot 60, so it's not this orphan piece of land in the middle of nowhere. And part of the rationale for that is in the mid-70s, the property owner was given permission, written permission from the village to use this little piece of land. The property owner came to the village and asked for permission to use it. They were given permission. They then built a concrete pad on it. So the apron of their garage is on village property. They were given written permission to use the land. It doesn't specify for what. No record of whether the village knew that there was this concrete pad put there. But moving forward, from an approving officer perspective, we should tidy it up and make sure that this little lot is theirs. And so where council comes into play isn't so much on that approving officer side, but how much does, or is the village willing to dispose of it and for how much? So if the council is in agreement that we should dispose of it, How much? Well, $718 is the lowest defensible market value that we could give that property based on the value of the adjoining parcel. Council could decide to go lower. Council could decide, this property owner has told staff that they really don't want to buy it at all. They don't want to, they've been using it, they have permission, why do they have to buy it? So council could say, well, let's give it to them for $10. What that would mean is that public notice would need to be issued that the village is disposing of this lot for less than market value. What could happen is the public, surrounding neighbors, might not like that this piece of land is being disposed of for less than market value. And then council could be in an awkward position with the direction they've given. So back to staff's perspective, staff would encourage council to sell it for market value, $718 to avoid these issues that could happen. And then the choice would be to the property owner. Approving officer has said, you want subdivision, you need to purchase this lot. The value's been set by council at $718, it's your choice. You can purchase this lot, subdivision can proceed. If you don't like that dollar value, then you don't need to, you won't be given approval of your subdivision.
All right. Any questions, Councillor Beaver, to the chair?
Once we put, a notice to dispose of this land, could people oppose this sale?
The chair, selling it at market value, the village still needs to provide notice of disposition of this lot. We tell the public what the lot is, how much it's being sold for, who it's being sold to. The public can then offer their feedback and commentary to council. Council would receive that information through a staff report and ultimately make a decision on whether to proceed with disposition or not. So at this point, all council is being asked is, how much would council like to dispose of the land for? And then staff would come back once we receive public input.
In effect, it's not just the amount, it's whether we do want to dispose of it. Because we could choose not to. Is that correct? If we don't move this motion, we would still continue to own a parcel of land that probably has no value to it, other than that small monetary value. But as far as it having any use for the municipality, there's no valid reason that we would want to retain that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Just so we know that it's not something that, geez, if we still have that, are we going to be kicking ourselves later for making the decision? So.
Correct. Could I add a comment there? The land's been occupied and being used by the owner for the last 50, 40 years, whatever it is, tax-free. And would make good sense for council to tidy it up and put that in their name so that other property owners that might be adjacent to it, could be interested in the property, and then things could get quite complicated since it's already been, concrete pads already on it.
Councillor
Through the chair. So I guess two questions. The first being, I'm hesitant to take the concrete pad into consideration because otherwise everybody could go build a concrete pad on a public piece of land and then we'd have to sell it to them. But were we to make this sale public, would it only be provided to that person? Like, I assume that that would just be the case. Somebody else couldn't come and go, we'll give you 1,000, we'll give you 1,500, we'll give it, like, this is just to that person. This doesn't open it up to sale. It just is specifically for the people who own that. Because I wouldn't want to open up a Pandora's box of people now going, oh, that's for sale. That's the only time I ever heard of the land for $1,000, I'll take it, right? So I guess I would want to understand that this is something that wouldn't open it to sale to anyone. It would be specific to the property owner that owns on either side.
Through the chair, the village has two options for disposing of land. One is in which it's a direct sale to someone interested in the land, or in this case not, but direct sale to an individual. The other way is allowing it to become open to the public through some kind of bid process. And in this case, staff are recommending that it be sold directly to the property owner.
Councillor Leaflet?
Chair, in the event that somebody offered more money, what would that do with the agreement that the village made to that property owner that they could use it? Like, couldn't the property owner come back and say, well, you made this agreement with it, there's no end date on it?
Through the chair, there's no easement on the property that gives them legal right to occupy or use the land. And so if the village chose to dispose of that land to a different party, it would be entirely within their right to do so.
So the recommendation is that the village issue public notice of disposition of PID 032057130 in the amount of $718 to Margaret Edwards as detailed in the staff report titled Disposition of Lot 60, 515 6th Street, dated October 17, 2024. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was given a new script and I'd forgotten that I had it. At the bottom, that the village offers to dispose of PID 0327057-130 to Margaret Edwards in the amount of $718. And if the offer is accepted, that the village issue a public notice for disposition of PID 0321557 in the amount of $1,718. Sorry about that.
Apologies.
All right, moved by Councillor Byrne. Seconded by Councillor Lang. Discussion. I guess the only thing that I had to ask is basically almost our proceeds will be the address, everything, right? And staff time, but great. So any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Then our 8th item. So we've had a member of the public express interest in becoming a member of the accessibility committee, and it's someone it's not a municipal resident, but they live immediately adjacent, and they do have the lived experience, which would be very beneficial to have this individual on our committee. And it doesn't, our terms of reference does not specifically exclude. That's why staff felt they could bring this forward to us. So the recommendation is that
Should I do a draft recommendation?
yes, please.
The recommendation is that Alexandra Halliday be appointed to the Accessibility Committee for a term ending December 31st, 2026. Or sorry, December 30th.
Moved by Councillor Leaflet, seconded by Councillor Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor? It's carried. Ms. Halliday for her interest in sitting on the municipal committee. Her contributions will be very valued. So that brings us to the end of our agenda. There is no in camera Take the motion to adjourn at 7:46, moved by Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Motion is carried.